Our coming session for the travel hall is how should post-coronavirus destination marketing be? And our guest is Peru's former Minister of Tourism, Mr. Edgar Vasquez. Mr. Edgar, welcome to Uzakrota. Thank you for joining us. Stage is
Thank you
yours.
for thank you for the invitation. I am very happy to be with you. Good morning from this side of the world. Good afternoon there. And well, I am now the director for the Center of Global Business and Economy of the Exporter Associations in Peru. I'm former Minister of Foreign Trade and Tourism of Peru. And well, this is an important event, one of the top 10 events in the world in the tourist sector. And in that line, for me, it's very important to participate as a speaker. And today, trying to explain a little how, from this side of the world, in Latin America, and in particular in Peru, we are working in order to have new conditions for the tourism post-COVID-19. And of course, I will take advantage a little in order to explain what is Peru and what are we doing here in regards to the our country and in the region. Please let me share my screen in order to show you some information that I want to present today. You know, well, I am sure that during these 3 days of Uzakrota Online 2020, you have heard a lot about international tourist arrival in the world and the very delicate and complicated situation in which everybody around the world is right now. Taking into account the World Tourist Organization numbers, during the first 8 months, the international tourist arrivals around the world have decreased 70%. It's amazing. Never before in the history of the tourism and in the register of the numbers, the world have received so huge negative impact in regards of international tourism. And of course, the very negative situation is very similar in all the regions around the world, not just in everything starts in Asia and China, but all the regions in the world are really in a very complicated situation. Of course, there are some good signals of recovery, in particular in some countries, but are not so strong yet in order to say that we are in the road for a soon recovery of the tourism. Here in the Americas, it's important to highlight that some of the big countries never close borders, never avoid international flights. And well, those are United States, Mexico, and Brazil, of course, the biggest continent. And for that reason, Americas, at the beginning of this pandemic situation, was not so affected. But when the virus was extended around the world, of course, the demand for tourism was close. And finally, the negative impact also appeared in general in the Americas. South America is definitely the most affected area, together with Central America. We already have more than 3-4 months with 100% decrease of the international arrivals to our countries in Central and South America. It's amazing the situation in the companies, in the different companies, in the different links in the chain of tourists, transport, hotels, restaurants, travel agencies, artisans, etc. All the different agents that participate in the tourist chain are equally affected. A lot of companies have closed because of the situation. a loss of jobs have lost because of the situation. And of course, the incomes are really affected, and the perspectives are not so good for the short term. In that regard, North America is the region in which we are, and North America and the Caribbean are the region in which we are seeing best situation, but of course, inside a very negative scenario. And maybe in the Americas, we should to seek these specific areas as the first one that will have the opportunity to have positive numbers during 2021. But of course, the expectation in general in the Americas is that the recovery of the pre-COVID-19 will arrive just in 3 or 5 years more, depending of course, depending of a set of measures and of course situation that could be generated by the countries, but of course together for the international community in order to recover the trust in the tourism, the recovery the trust in the travels, basically in the long-term travels, long-distance travels, and of course in that regards the situation require more attention from the governments and require very creative and innovative participation of the private sector. This year will be historical in terms of the decrease. You know very well that almost 70% decrease this year. That means just 450, around 450 international arrivals. Most of them were registered during the 3 first months of the year, and of course, definitely is the unique situation. The previous international crisis in regard to tourism were in 2009 because the international crisis, and in 2003 because the SARS of the family of the COVID virus, and of course those in those years the situation was negative, but not so negative, historically negative as today. And in that line, there are some countries around the world, but in particular in the Americas, that will have a more negative impact because their economies depend more from tourism. For example, in the Asia Pacific region, Macau GDP, tourism represent 48% of the total GDP of this country. That means that for Macau, this situation is very complicated. For Fiji, in this island in the Asia Pacific, the tourism represent 13% of the GDP. But saying in Europe, Spain and Croatia are the most impacted economies because the current situation, negative situation of the tourism. And in the Americas, the situation is basically around, in terms of the economies, around Mexico, Panama, Jamaica, because for these countries, the tourism represent around 9% of the GDP. For example, for Peru, the tourism represent less than 3% of GDP. That means that in terms of the total economy, of course, this not represent the most important impact. But when we analyze the internal situation of tourism, in Peru, tourism represent more than 2 million jobs. And of course, all these 2 million jobs are affected right now. And maybe for all the economy is not a big impact in countries as Peru, but for the families, for the people that depend, its job depends on tourism, of course, the situation is very complicated. And for that is necessary a joint work between companies, between tour operators, between governments. in order to introduce right measures. We are losing a lot of time in general in the world. In some countries are doing well or better than others in regards to tourism. My appreciation is that in Europe, for example, they was wrong in order to accelerate the intent on recover the tourism, and that is why in some countries already are second wave of this virus. But in that line, in countries as Peru, in general, in South America, the authorities are more cautious about the possibility to accelerate or force the recovery of the tourism in the short term. The authorities are thinking in press and introduce additional measures to support the tourist activities, basically thinking around the second quarter of the 2021 in order to, from this time, accelerate the possible recovery. Of course, this situation will depend on many other aspects that I want to share with you. The conditions for a real recovery of tourism around the world will depend of a series of elements that together will give, of course, strong probabilities of a real recovery. The first one is people in general need to trust, and basically in the health situation in the countries. And if we see the numbers, the situation is not comfortable yet. With a second wave in Europe, with the very difficult numbers in United States, and with Latin America in general, with a decrease in the number of people that have the virus, but with important numbers yet. That means that Latin America have not totally passed the first wave of this virus. And that means that in general, around the world, the people are seeing that the trust in the health situation in the countries is not sufficient yet. And trust not just because the health situation, trust also because some signal of the governments are not so clear around the possibility to fight in an effective way against this virus. And some information are not clear about the sufficient provision of vaccines in the near future for everybody around the world. Taking into account that, and together with, of course, a war in which the health of the people was affected for fat or bad food conditions and heart disease or any other pattern of the comportment of the health of the human beings, of course, this aspect don't generate the sufficient trust in the people in order to start soon the possibility to take at least of course, step by step, passing to international it seems that we have problem with the connection. Could you confirm me that now we are connected? Well, I don't know till what part of my presentation you were able to hear me, but well, I was trying to explain that in order to have a real condition for the recovery of the tourism, I was explaining that the first element is to have trust in health situation around the world, in particular, of course, in all the countries. Also, the companies should to be very clear information about the implementation of protocols of biosecurity, all the efforts that could be necessary in order to have stamps, in order to implement protocols, in order to make available information for the people is very important. And the third element that I was explaining was the vaccination strategy around the world. All the countries are they're working very hard in order to receive the sufficient vaccines in order to cover all the population. I was explaining that in Peru, we already are working in order to receive 25 million vaccines in order to cover the initial part of the strategy, but we are 33 million people. That means that we already don't have the sufficient number of vaccine in order to cover all our population. And we are negotiating with different companies in order to have additional number of vaccine. And in the same situation are different countries around the world. And of course, people are seeking for clear information about what countries could be in a possibility to be safe, to have safe condition in regards to the vaccines. That is very important in regard to recovery, a real recovery of the tourism. A fourth important element is that finally governments should to continue going to the opening of the borders and of course the possibility of international transport, air transportation, maritime transportation is necessary to continue opening our borders in order to let finally the flow of international people for different reasons. At the beginning, of course, the return continue because some people have lost their job in different countries and want to come back to the origin countries. The second reason is business. Of course, business should to continue in regards of goods, in regards of different services. And the third possibility in the near future will be tourism motivation. Right now, the first motivation will not be tourism. We need generate the condition in order to generate trust, as I was explaining, for the recovery of tourism. Fifth element, important element, is the government support. It's not possible to leave the private sector, the tour operator, alone. It's necessary that all the government should to implement real measures in order to make possible better conditions for the recovery of the company, of all the link of the chain of the tourism. Again, restaurants, hotels, travel agency, transport companies, etc., artisans, all the economic agents that participate in the tourism sector in different countries, nationally and internationally. It's necessary an action of the government, and better is if the action is coordinated between countries in similar regions. For example, the example in the European Union. Here in South America, we are not working so close in regards to the strategy for the recovery of tourism, and that is a pending agenda that should to be generated for our authorities in order to let South America gain a space of a safe region again in the near future. And finally, of course, for a real recovery of tourism will be necessary the economic recovery of the countries, because a lot of jobs was lose, a lot of the wage have decreased, and of course it's necessary the recovery in order to give to the people additional monetary incomes in order to recover their previous level of life and consume, and of course have sufficient financial resources in order to decide for tourism again. But of course, in this context, for the new marketing vision, it's necessary to see in the three important parts of this strategy. The tourism. The tourists, they will ask for a lot of information and new and safety experiences. The new tourism post-COVID-19 should to be an experience that could give to the people the sufficient trust in the general condition of all the locations that they will visit, including restaurants, including hotels, and of course, tourist attractions. In that regard, the tourists will prefer individual or a small group travels. That means that in those countries or places in which the multitude of human beings is possible because it's a very big attraction, should to introduce a strategy in order to make a segmentation of the different groups in order to let the a situation in which not just because the COVID-19 is because in the minds of the people right now, of course, the scare about the contact with people that they don't know very well is very high, and that is why it's very important to introduce a strategy in order to let small groups or individuals to have the opportunity to enjoy different attractions, but without mix them with other groups or other individuals. Of course, the people will and is preferring that we are seeing that here in Peru with the internal tourism. The people that are right now in the internal tourism is active, is restarting the activity. They are preferring nature, and they are preferring beaches. They are preferring rural communities, and of course, countries that have strengthening in those areas will have more opportunities to capture a bigger portion of the next year international tourism recovery. That is an important element. The government should to support these areas in order to let them to implement protocols, receive stamps, and etc. Because this area will be very high demanded for the tourists in the near future. Of course, the idea is to have minimum contact with the company worker also. All the protocols should to be very well implemented in order to avoid less contact as possible. Well, the people will high demand for information and technological tools. Everything that could be possible to make by the cell phone is better. Payments, menus, list of prices, list of attraction, interaction with the people in the tourist operation, etc., is better. That means that the company should to implement new technology, new innovative services that could avoid the interaction or unnecessary interaction between the tourists and the workers in general with other people around the activity. In regard to companies, it's necessary the adaptation and new capabilities. Of course, adaptation to the biosafety protocols and receive stamps. This is a key element. Everybody around the world is seeking for companies, hotels, restaurants, etc., with the stamps, with safety stamps, of course, with the implementation of protocols. Right now, it's very important to think that the new marketing for the post-coronavirus situation of the tourism will pass for the adoption of clear protocols of biosecurity and stamps. Workers training, because we need to train very well to our workers in order to implement the protocols in a safe way. Of course, companies should to adopt new technological tools in line with the demand of the tourists of these tools. Also, all the services should to be very flexible because people is scared and maybe the cancellation could be less than 24 hours, and the flexibility is necessary will be part of an important element of the offers that the tourists will seek in order to decide whose service they will take. Permanent communication with different stakeholders, the counterparts in the location, the government authorities, of course, the international scene, is necessary an interaction in order to share best practices, share information, and of course, try to generate trust around the people. And of course, the operators, as right now is they are doing, should to have attractive and innovative offers. But also it's necessary country and city promotion agency creativity and resources. They need to adopt short, medium, and long-term strategy in order to recover the promotion of the tourism, increase the budget for the promotion. This is not time for decrease budget. This is the time for increase the budget because it's more necessary in order to inform to the world what are the conditions of the countries. Intensive presence in digital media networking and of course alliance with tour operators in different situations. Well, those are the elements that all of us should to consider in order to have a real post-coronavirus recovery of the tourism. And of course, for countries as Peru, if you know Peru, is in the South America, in the central of the Pacific side of the South America. We have connection with all the Americas, Europe, and in indirect connection with the Asia Pacific. Right now, the government has authorized flights for less than 9 hours. That means that now we just have authorization for the connectivity among the Americas. But in the next days, the government will authorize the flights with Europe. That means that this situation will have additional opportunities for generate trust in Peru. Well, Peru is a very rich country. You know, we have coastal region, highlands, Amazon rainforest, and we have a very important attraction in tourism. We have a very famous cuisine is around the world right now, competing with the best cuisines around the world. And of course, we have one of the new 7 wonders of the world. Machu Picchu is amazing, frankly speaking. And of course, I want to invite to everybody to sing in Peru in the near future when this will be possible to travel. Thank you.
I will do that. So thank you very much, Mr. Edgar, for your contribution and for your joining to Uzakrota. So speak you later. Thank you very much.